You either live by the gun or you die by the sword.
Welcome to the Good, the Bad, and the Weird podcast. I'm Nicho.
And I'm Chris.
And today we have a very special guest with us. We have my good buddy Kalloth on the line. He is joining us for our first ever episode on a TV show.
Yeah.
So we're doing The Last of Us with Kalloth. Welcome in, Kalloth.
Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited for today. I honestly have been pumped about this for the last few weeks, and I'm just excited to talk about The Last of Us. I didn't expect to be on, but I'm really glad I'm here, man.
Same. I'm excited. I'm just to give everyone a background, I met Kalloth back when he was streaming Spider-Man. He did a Japanese voiceover of it for his playthrough, and it was very interesting to just see it in a different format. So he does a lot of streaming of variety games, and then we started talking over like Yakuza movies and stuff too. So
a classic, a favorite.
Classics.
So The Last of Us. For those who don't know, it's based on the video game of the same name, and it follows a jack of all trades who escorts a 14-year-old girl across the fungi-infested United States.
It's very end-of-the-world apocalyptic, but I do like that this one does take a little bit of a twist on a very tired and worn-out, like, Journey sort of style show with zombies added on top.
And by now, I mean, the zombie genre is so oversaturated by now. I mean, remember how big it was back in the 2010s when it was like almost everywhere because of The Walking Dead, and it was right around then when The Last of Us came out, and now it's just not really a thing anymore, if anything.
Yeah. We've kind of noticed, like, the monsters have a trend, and we were very much in zombie era when Last of Us was a thing.
I'd say yes and no. It depends on what country you're going to for your zombie movies, because it does go in waves. I think from what I've seen, and granted, I'm not as versed in every country and what they're doing, I've noticed that specifically in like the late 2010s, early 2020s, Japan has been doing some interesting stuff with the genre where they just kind of take the zombies and do whatever the hell they want with it. So
very true. And it is kind of nice to see other countries' interpretations on the zombie trend, because with the exception of The Last of Us, most of the zombie things that we saw when this was being big, like World War Z, the
Walking Dead.
Walking Dead, yes, that one, which I watched, for Christ's sake.
Started the boom, I think. Same.
Yeah, they were all they followed a very similar format, even if it was like a layer of comedy added on or a romance like put on. Even the ones that tried to be more horror, it was still very like the same format.
Yeah, I think like Zombieland was that ending era where that hit mainstream media. Then you had like Warm Bodies and stuff, and
definitely where this one definitely got to shine because it already had a huge fan base because of the games.
Oh yeah, well, and the games themselves, I think, hold a special spot because Kalloth, you said you played through the entire game again, correct?
Yeah, so right before all this, I actually just finished like a couple hours ago, but I played it when a couple years ago, and I just replayed it just because I want to have it fresh in my head, but I've beaten this game, I like this at least a half a dozen times now, and it's always interesting because I actually noticed a couple new things this time when I was playing, because I had the TV show in the back of my head. I'm like, oh, it's funny because they did that differently, but yet they did this, that, but it still ended with the same point. So yeah, I'm a fan of the game, didn't get into it a couple years ago, and I'm really glad I did.
Yeah, I'm kind of about the same way. I think I told you, I first saw my cousin start playing it, like when it first came out. This is my cousin who's like up to date on pretty much any game that he likes. He's plays it the day it releases.
Mm-hmm.
So I got to see like the very, very first. Where did I get up to? I think his daughter died where I got up, where I saw in the game, and then I had to go to work.
Yeah.
So I didn't get to see it very far, then I bought a PlayStation 3 off of one of my college buddies, and The Last of Us was one of the games he gave me with it. So I played it when I first moved to one of the first times I moved to Arkansas. I think that was before you and I even met each other. So.
I think so.
So that's my history. I've only played it the one time, so I'm curious how it translates from the game, because I know 100% I've forgotten stuff. So
yeah,
but so I personally am coming from this from a little bit of remembering the game a little bit, but also viewing the TV show as a separate piece of media from the game itself.
Sure.
That's fair.
I watched them both media style because I don't actually own the game. I either got to watch a few friends play, and then I love watching streamers play stuff, and Last of Us was a huge hit. So just about everyone and their grandmother who streams had at least one episode, if not the whole game. And then when the second one came out, it was a mad dash to see who could upload that the fastest. So like I watched all of these cinematic style. I never actually like played the game. So like when I was watching the TV show version, I had a lot more time to be like, oh, I remember that dialogue specifically from the show because I watched like 8 people play it. Okay.
So I think it's interesting just seeing how even us as the 3 people approached just getting the source information or just trying to ignore the source information a little bit.
Very true. And I do think this is a rather unique one as far as like an adaptation, because not only did this have a huge fan base, but this was like, we didn't have a whole lot of faith in adaptations when the first one came out. It was very hit or miss on whether or not something, especially video game adaptation, was going to be even remotely watchable, let alone good.
Yeah, and especially for me, who's gone down the rabbit hole of watching domestically almost every single video game movie released. There is a steep drop in increase in quality. I'll say that.
Putting it lightly, I mean, can you really like name any that were actually like really good? Not just like okay, but like were actually good? Because like the only thing. I can't really think of any that were like blew my mind. They were like, oh, okay, this is like mid. It's not what I expected, but I mean, they definitely tried their best with what they were given, and really, I mean, A for effort, I guess. At the end of the day,
Silent Hill,
I think was one of the few early good ones, and then as like we have seen, I think Last of Us started a trend of picking up these more like story-based driven games and trying to get them into movie format, because since then we've seen The Witcher, which has been phenomenal. We've seen the success out of the Mario movie.
I mean the Mario movie is actually pretty decent, I'd say. Yeah,
like we've definitely seen like if you put the effort and time in it, there's the fan base who will spend money on it, and I think Last of Us proved that for them.
Well, that and I think it showed really well, because what I liked early on when The Last of Us came out was this was breaking, like it was just basically, it was different from other games, because a lot of them weren't, I didn't want to say as serious of a story, but at the same time, like I can't really think of any games prior to that where everyone was talking about the story about it. Like it really made you feel for these decisions and these choices that you were making. Like it was doing something different then, which is why I was just surprised like they're going to pick this to adapt it, because there's so much going into it besides the gameplay. Like you have the story itself, you have to find the right actors, you have to have, are you going to basically spin the wheel again and show the same thing? Because even then, that's going to get boring. Like some books can't do that, or movies can't do that as well as books at the same time. So this had a lot going for it. But I mean, you have HBO, who, if they said give us $1 billion, I'm sure HBO would have said, okay, what else do you want? You want something else? I'll give it to you without even an ounce of hesitation. So like, I had a feeling they were going to nail it when they got involved.
Yeah, that is one thing, especially with like studios and getting them to. Getting the studio who wants to work with it.
Yes, exactly. That is the key.
Yeah. So, real quick, I do want to go over kind of the rough cast and crew, because there's quite a few people to go over.
They're all big names.
It's created by Neil Druckmann and Craig Mazin, both of who wrote the entire series. It was directed by Mazin and Druckmann, as well as Ali Abbasi, Jeremy Webb, Peter Hoare, Lisa Johnson, and Jasmila Zbanek. It stars Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey. And so here's some interesting things I went into. So I do like doing research on the people who make these things. So Druckmann was the writer of quite a few of the Naughty Dog games.
Yep.
He's currently co-president of Naughty Dog, having started as a programmer for Jak 3, but he also was a producer for the Uncharted games as well as writer for the Uncharted games.
I actually meant to cut you off there, but he actually is the president now, because I can't remember his name, but he just stepped down, so he's actually the head of Naughty Dog now, apparently. So he went from bottom to the top, actually.
Hell yeah, that's awesome for him, because I mean that's the thing is Naughty Dog. So I knew Naughty Dog as Crash Bandicoot and Jak and Daxter as a kid.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that they had moved on to do more mature themed games. And I actually didn't play the Uncharted games until it came free on PlayStation for me for a bit.
Same.
And but my brother hounded me to play those games and talk about another story-driven game, The Uncharted games are fantastic for that. Like, the first game's mechanics suck.
Oh, but it's still a great story. And even the second one is like my absolute favorite game in the entire series because I just love Nathan so much as a character. Like, how can you just not like him? Like, he's just so likable.
Well, and also Uncharted really kind of helped create this niche of like story-driven gaming for like streaming, because that was another big one that like we watched the hell out of other people playing it, specifically because I didn't have to necessarily watch like an actor or like the personality playing the game. I could rely on the actual gameplay itself to like really be entertaining on its own from a story point. I didn't have to like add on jibs and like entertaining little bits that normally is why you watch streaming.
Yeah. Well, and also I've stumbled across it years ago where people upload all the cutscenes for like a game and call it like
the movie.
Final Fantasy 13,
the
movie.
Yeah. Final Fantasy's fans are the worst about that because they also add music over the background, which I love. Mwah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But what I found more interesting than Druckmann is Mason, the other writer for the series. His main credits that I'm familiar with are Scary Movie 3 and 4,
what?
Superhero Movie,
what?
Hangover Part 2 and 3, what? And The Huntsman Winter's War.
A solid repertoire, really.
Okay, I didn't know that until today, and I'm surprised I didn't, because wow, that's actually kind of mind-blowing, because I didn't know that until... Wow.
Yeah, as well, he wrote a movie called Superhero Movie, or as well as directing the superhero movie, he wrote this movie called The Specials, which is another superhero movie directed by James Gunn.
Nice.
Wow. So I just thought it was such a weird mashup of the guy who's like big head dog at Naughty Dog working with the guy who did probably what's considered the worst scary movies.
Interesting.
Yeah, but also like it is interesting to see that he's definitely someone who has experience with coming in with something that's already been started, a story and plot that's already going. And I mean, he did manage to like Scary Movie 3 and 4. They're not good, but they were successful.
Yeah, enough
to make more, which by studio standards is all you want.
Yeah, that is true.
As for the many other directors, Abbasi, I'm only familiar with the poster for one of his movies called Border that I've been wanting to watch for a couple years. Webb has directed quite many TV shows, including some of Matt Smith's Doctor Who episodes, Downton Abbey, Altered Carbon, Bone and Shadows, Lock and Key, The Umbrella Academy.
All great examples of taking written work that was very popular when it came out. Like it came out, the entire book community lost their mind for Shadow and Bone, for Lock and Key, for The Umbrella Academy. Those books were massive. And then turning them into TV shows that even people like my husband, who had never read or even heard of the books, really enjoyed.
Yeah. Well, horror is similar to Webb, working on other shows such as Doctor Who, The Umbrella Academy, Daredevil, Iron Fist, and It's a Sin.
All good ones.
Yeah.
Great show right there.
As for Pascal, I know he is well loved.
Daddy Pascal himself.
It's Zaddy Pascal, actually, but...
It is in The Mandalorian as well as a number of other shows. But the only other things I've seen Pedro Pascal in is The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent,
right? Yep,
and Game of Thrones.
I will say, he was definitely an actor that people, like, he wasn't a new actor during Last of Us, but I do think that people started to really recognize, at least in America, Pedro Pascal as something really special during The Last of Us. Like, that's when his name was a household name.
Yeah.
And then when Mandalorian hit, people were like, oh my god, and he's hot.
I love him because The Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. So
I mean, like he's always been a good actor, but like people's eyes were on him for this show.
And I'm gonna be honest, I don't think he's ever really done anything bad. Like even like the worst movie that I've seen that he was in, I don't even say that's a bad movie, but it wasn't as good, was the second Kingsman movie, and he was one of the best characters in that entire movie. Like even that's the first thing I saw him in ever. Like he's always been consistently really good, even in films that are not as good as they could be. But so he's got a good resume on his back, and he's going to be good for a while.
Yeah, well, that's a point that I used to hate Nicolas Cage, and one of our coworkers pointed out to me. He asked if any movie Cage had been in, was the movie bad because of Cage, or was it just a bad movie and Cage did the best he could with it?
Definitely the latter.
That is debatable on some of Cage's movies.
True.
Yeah.
As for Ramsey, for me, she's very similar to Pascal. I've only seen her in Holmes and Watson and her role in Game of Thrones.
Game of Thrones definitely put Ramsay on the map.
Yeah.
They are, I think after The Last of Us, they definitely have come into the public's eye, and people are like definitely waiting on them to do more. They won, or were at least nominated for several awards for the show. And like they'd show no interest in not continuing their acting career, which is great. I do think another reason why the two of them, both Pedro and Ramsay, have like become really recognizable nowadays in the acting world is because of their relationship outside of the show. Pascal turned out to be a really great mentor and motivation for Ramsay, and like they were very vocal about how great he was to work with, and Pascal was just as vocal about how wonderful Ramsay had been to work with, and that they worked really well together, but they kept that relationship very clean, professional, and no level of the ick, which was really nice because when this was happening, so many other celebrities were getting caught with dating just 18s or like, oh, my daughter's best friend is now your wife, sort of like scandals. So it was really nice to see an actor who was coming into their own, becoming really good, and also a genuinely good person.
Kind of like Alan Rickman, from what I've heard.
Exactly the same way. Only like Alan Rickman went through that like breakthrough way before everyone like had TV to the point of like watching and being able to see it all the time with their phones and the internet. You just kind of had to wait for all that to come out with him. And then like way after his acting career has kind of like wrapped up for the most part, then people are like, oh yeah, he was great to work with. Pedro and Ramsay are having that experience happen right now in live action.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of this.
And I have yet to see anywhere that anyone ever said anything bad about Pedro Pascal, ever. Like, not that I've extensively deep dived him, but I've never seen anything negative besides he's super nice, super sweet. Even with his fans, I'm sure he's probably exhausted. Like, when he's at screenings, still the nicest person in the room, I've been told, like everyone I see online, so...
Yeah, and from what I can tell from interviews, he's definitely more out there than Ramsay, which is good. Ramsay is still, like, very young and does not need to be spending their entire life in front of a camera. But, like, Pedro is an adult, and he's like, yeah, my order from Starbucks is a black coffee with 3 shots of espresso in it. And people are like, dude, you okay?
So, let's dive into The Last of Us. So... Episode 1, When You're Lost in the Darkness. The synopsis, and we'll go, so, because we've never done an episode like this before, we're going to go through a synopsis and then just talk about each episode as we come. We'll go through that. So, the synopsis of the first episode, we're introduced to our main character, Joel, at the beginning of the outbreak, as well as we get a big time leap to when he is further, it's like, 10 years or so down the line?
Yeah.
I think it was like 10 or 15 years on once they were into the apocalypse a little bit. It was a good amount of time. Yeah,
and so the everything settled down. We're now working with like an established world instead of trying to create the world as we're going or going through the chaos like you see with a lot of disaster and zombie movies like World War Z. But in this episode, we're also introduced to his smuggling partner Tess, as well as Ellie and Marlene. Marlene's the head of the Fireflies, and Ellie is obviously the other main character for the movie, or for the show.
Yeah.
And so I remember I messaged you on this, Cal, of like, why is this episode so goddamn long?
Yeah.
See, it's funny because I didn't really see that when I first saw it, and then when I was rewatching it to take notes, I'm like, wow, this is actually like a full movie right here. Like,
yes.
I'm sitting here watching, like, I don't have an issue with the pacing, but I'm like, this is like, I think it's ended up being like an hour and a half altogether.
Yeah.
And I get why they did it, because you have to kind of show this universe, and I like some things they did differently, like the cold open they had with the talk show and explaining how fungi works. That was never in the game. I actually like that a little bit better than the intro they had in the game itself, because they just had a radio broadcast explaining like a typical end of the world broadcast. That was something unique that they did. And plus, I thought it grounded the show well, because let me rephrase that. They said that they could never let it happen personally, because we would, but we're also getting a lot hotter in our planet as it is. And I'm sure you guys remember the wonderful heat wave we had last few weeks. So,
oh god, that's caused an issue for some of our projects because now that's added another scope to deal with.
Yeah.
Lovely.
But so actually, I'm glad you picked up on that, Cal, because I looked up because you saw in my notes earlier that I felt this felt very 9/11-esque, especially once we cut to the future.
Yeah,
because
when you see the guy in the bush shirt.
Yeah, well, and Ellie's also she doesn't know anything besides the pandemic,
which
or
does
the world with the virus.
Yeah,
or
which
fungi.
Exactly.
I mean, honestly, though, it's very much reminiscent of like my younger brother does not know a world pre 9/11. So like it makes a lot of sense the way they showed it.
Yeah. And I mean, my brother was really young when it happened and I was old enough, but I experienced that way differently than everyone else that I normally talk to because I was living overseas near a military base at the time. So
yeah,
very different. But that's an important part because Cal, the game is set in 2013. The show's set in 2033. So even and that, what I think is fascinating about it is that they recognize that they couldn't set it in 2013.
Yeah.
They had to advance it past our time to already modernize it because of how quickly technology and everything's advanced since 2013 already.
Oh, yeah.
But they were still able to keep so much of the core parts of the believability with the overarching story, where things happen, and like how the fungus/zombies work, that like all they really did essentially was just change one number in the year. Like the only thing it really did was keep you grounded in the show. It doesn't really change anything, which I think is a nice touch.
Oh yeah.
There's only like one thing that I thought was really, I don't even want to say interesting, but it kind of, once I realized it, I'm like, oh, that really sucks. But I'll get on that later with you guys because you bring up a good point, Chris, that I didn't think of until now. But like, it didn't change anything. Like, they don't have phones, they don't really have any technology. More of they're just living and surviving, and it would have made a difference if it was 2016 or 2003 as it is anyway. It's just some slight differences, but like most people wouldn't pick up on it anyway. So
yeah, and I think topically, it was good to when they released it. Because there's a lot of themes and events that really mimic stuff that's happened in the last 3 or 4 years.
Sure.
Especially in regards to the COVID pandemic, much better than this show's going to age better than when we decided to do our micro review on pandemic movies like 3 weeks into everything.
Yeah.
Oh, geez, that must have been great. I gotta find that episode now and listen to that because I really want to hear what you guys have to say now because I didn't even know that you did one until now.
It's about God, that's like 3 years old now.
Yeah, for sure.
But I do think that not only making it modern, but also the slow pacing of this opening is 100% necessary because it's setting up Joel as a character for himself. There's a line in the show that says, "Never going to do it for yourself." Which is a theme that constantly shows up through Joel the entire time. He's learning to do things through other, and Ellie is what he needs to advance as a person because, again, he's not going to do it for himself.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do think that is something that this show did significantly better than a lot of the zombie apocalypse movies that were, and even just TV shows in general, that were out and like hot topics at the time. This one showed that it's not just like a desire to be with other people. It is an actual want and need. Like people disintegrate, not just like, oh, we go into chaos Mad Max style, but like you stop caring about yourself when you're not with other people who you care about. And this show did such a great job of having that focus without necessarily spelling it out for the audience.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
Yeah. Other little things I do like about this episode too, is that they do a great job of really changing the world from what we know it, because it goes from what we think of nostalgic, because 2013, when the start of the show set, the Wii's one of the more modern consoles still.
What are you talking about? It's still relevant today. How dare you?
Yeah, exactly. I'm with you there, Chris.
But it's also about, starts off very much so protecting yours and your own when you're about to lose it all, because that's something that is constant throughout it, is the people that Joel runs into, and we'll talk about them later, are always trying to protect someone else besides themselves, for the most part.
Yeah.
And the one that's not trying to protect the others around him and just trying to survive, he gets killed.
True. Good metaphor.
But they all kind of do. Well, no. That is one thing I have it noted. From not playing the game in years to this, I ended up not really caring as much for the side characters, because once you start getting in that pattern of they only last like 2 episodes.
Yeah. I will say, I think for me, I love the show, but I think the biggest hurdle overall, and it's something that we see, it's a trend right now anyway, but I do think it's going to be a problem down the line, is that these episodes are so long. And like,
oh yeah,
like it is nice to be able to sit there and be immersed fully in the world and have the time to develop it and all that. But as someone who lives off of rewatching old shows, like that is my go-to. One of the things that makes those shows accessible is having them built into real world time frames. So like a 30-minute, a 45-minute episode is something that I can reasonably fit in while I'm cooking dinner or eating or in between something that I'm doing. An hour and a half long show, well, at this point, I'm watching one of them. I can't even like make an excuse to binge them.
Well, I actually have a thought on that. So I wonder, because I've noticed this happening with the Marvel shows too, is that now that everything's online, show times don't have to be consistent.
True.
So being aired under a certain time frame.
Yeah.
I do wonder if how in like video games they have chapter lengths that vary. I wonder if that's why these are changing a little bit, because I started playing Final Fantasy 16 and just the opening took me like 2.5 hours to play through.
Yeah, and like don't get me wrong, I don't necessarily hate that, but like even the new Zelda game, the opening like tutorial island takes you, depending on how thorough you are, ages to do, like a whole day's worth of playing if you are being really thorough and picking up everything, trying to do everything to get off the main island. Granted, you can like speed run it and get done, but you're still gonna be up there for ages. So don't get me wrong, like I understand why they're reaching longer. Like it does work, the story wise, especially for Last of Us is a good example of how it does work. But I worry about like in 10, 20 years, when we're like in a nostalgia mood and you're wanting to rewatch something you've already seen, are you going to put on The Last of Us? Or are you going to have to say like, oh, it's like a movie, I'm going to sit down and watch The Lord of the Rings and The Last of Us? Like,
yeah, I see your point, considering I noticed like a lot of these episodes, they were at least almost an hour length for the most part or more. Like they weren't short episodes, and it's not like one of those you can just kind of put it in the background and like, I don't know, watch it when you're eating dinner. You have to kind of be immersed into it so you know what's going on, because if not, you're going to miss something, you're not going to know what's going on, or you're going to be introduced to new characters, you don't really know what's happening. So it's, I like your point, actually. I didn't even think of that until now, because that's something that I will want to definitely revisit in like a year and see how I feel about it, and maybe a couple more years down the road.
And at least with games, you are physically, for the most part, capable of like pausing the game yourself and saying like, okay, like even though this isn't quote unquote the chapter end, like I have to go, I have to do something. I'm gonna pause it. It at least like, and like people say like, oh well, you can do that with a TV show, but like with a video game, there's so much slower pace because you can just stand around and like collect wood or talk to NPCs for like however long you feel like. That I don't think they necessarily translate real well. So that's my one like complaint / hurdle with the entirety of The Last of Us is great. I loved it. I loved the detail. I loved how well it reinterpreted the game. But boy, it is a challenge to sit down and like watch it.
Well, and it's also kind of a little bit of an old timey sense in, well, a little bit, because like I started watching this old detective show called Columbo.
My favorite.
I was also thrown off that the first episode was an hour and a half long.
The pilot, yes.
But then there's other things, like in the past we used to have serial TV shows that we've talked about every now and then that have varying time frames. Like Zatoichi is one of the longest ones, where each movie is a little bit of a different length, but that was what it was before television was a specific time frame.
That's true.
So I don't know. I just think it's an interesting thing to keep an eye on, just especially with going forward and things becoming longer and longer, trying to keep your attention span a bit more.
Well, and also like this is definitely one of those ones that's good enough that in the future, if someone had missed this, I would want them to see it. It is a little hard to be like, all right, now block out 3 hours of your evening so you can get caught up on The Last of Us.
But I wanted to ask you something about this world a little bit, Cal, because it goes, and I don't remember how well the game transitions, because it goes really from just kind of everyday middle-class America to this totalitarian regime, or what's presented as like a totalitarian regime in multiple. It's kind of a weird setting. I didn't know if that's how like the game really felt, because again, I don't remember what the start of that world is out. Like once I left Boston, that's all I remember of the game is everything outside of that, really.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I think the one thing this show really leans into more is what when Neil Druckmann was giving an interview about the show, is he wanted to show the NPCs off as more than just being NPCs. Like, you get to see more of Fedra this time around. You get to see more of the other characters that really were there. So yeah, like, it was a little bit like that, but you also don't spend enough time there where you can get you spend more time in the show versus in the game, because in the game, you start the game off, you meet up with Tess, you grab your gear, then immediately leave, and that's when you run into Ellie and Marlene. Like, you don't have a whole lot of time to get a feel of the world, because as soon as you do, basically shit goes sideways immediately. Like, they're having a fight with the Fireflies, so you're really only there for like 10-20 minutes, and that's honestly pushing it. Like, it's not enough to get like a great idea how Fedra is even like, and this show takes the time to expand it more with like the beginning scene when that little girl walked up and how messed up it kind of was. We're like, oh, don't worry, you're gonna be fine, and then next thing you know, you see Joel throwing her body in the fire. The next scene, so
yeah. Well, that is actually one thing I thought of. Like, it's unfortunate, and I think that's part of one of the things I started having issues with the show, is that yes, it allows them to expand the world a little bit, but when they're starting to expand through other characters, and those characters don't last long,
that does make it hard to like feel like the world is solid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that fits differently from what the game is, because there are people dying constantly in the game.
Oh yeah,
but you're like, oh shit, okay, you're constantly in danger though. You don't have 20 minutes of dialogue and then danger.
Mm-hmm.
Not even then. Like, a lot of the NPCs are either unnamed, or you see them for like 1 second, you find out their name, and then you shoot them right away. Like, you don't have the time to even know who they are at all, which the show took the time to, hey, this is what this person does, this is what they're doing, and now they're dead. So
yeah
I do think though that, like, as far as apocalypse and zombie shows go, especially like TV style, I do think they did spend a little bit more effort than what we were seeing as far as getting the side characters to feel more like real humans, as opposed to just like, oh, future zombie gonna double cross me in the second.
Yeah, I can see that. Speaking of the second, let's move on to the second episode, Infected. At the end of episode 1, we find out that Ellie's infected, but she's immune. And we get a little bit of the before the outbreak, and we start running into some issues with, Joel runs into issues because Tess ends up dying, as well as Tess dying and just having to go on and carry on a mission solo without having the support that he's used to having. So
yeah.
This was some interesting stuff they did in the show as well that I actually was looking forward to talk with you about, because this is where they start bringing in some different things that the game never did. Like, in the game, you immediately run into the spores, and when that happens, they can't breathe it in, so they wear masks for this. During here, I don't know what the right word is, but they saw like outside of the building, like they would touch it. Next thing, like all the quarter sets were hot, like a nest almost. So that was something they never actually brought in, which I thought was really interesting. And I like what they did with Tess in this. I think I like a little bit better, because I don't remember in the game itself, but Tess and him, they were friends, they were close partners, but never really lead into their romance at all. And this, they lead into it a lot more, because at least that's how I saw it personally, because there's like occasional moments here and there in the game where they kind of joke about being like a little bit closer than friends, but this, I feel like it leaned into a lot more, considering like, you could just see it in Joel, like it affects him a lot more with his face and how he looks deeply upset when she finds out about Tess being weaker, or seeing Tess's bite, or just I just felt it more with these two instead of just them kind of being partners the whole time as smugglers.
Yeah, no, I can see that, because again, it goes back to that they have the time. Tess is given, because I think she dies an hour into the game, if that.
If that, she dies pretty early on. That's really when the game gets started, honestly.
Yeah, and the show, she gets like maybe hour and a half of screen time total.
I mean, for a show that is honestly like kind of short as far as like what they're trying to like show, the time frame that they're trying to go for, it's a decent enough amount of time that you kind of like almost got duped into thinking she was going to be part of it when you're just watching the show.
Yeah. That's actually a good point, especially if you haven't played the game before at all.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people did, like, there was definitely a lot of people who had played the game, but because it came out, I think, like, what was it, Netflix? Like, HBO, like, pretty big name, people are just able to scroll and pick the next big thing. There was a lot of people who watched it who definitely did not know the game. And so I think part of that also helped when they decided to change out how the infection worked, as opposed to like spore-based versus like this new, more mysterious method.
No, they know it's bite-based.
I know, but like the game is very straightforward as far as like, here's your mechanics, this is what you need to do to survive. Whereas the show had a lot more time to like play up the zombie mystery.
Kind of, because that is one. So I do like that at the end of episode 1, you see one of the clickers.
Yes.
And to your point, Chris, I kind of think it leans, like, I don't even want to say it leans more to the realism, but it kind of does in a way, because what I like this is actually a really good thing I like in the entire show that I didn't like at first, but I ended up growing to love. Joel in the show is still a monster, but he seems more realistic, because he mentions he has bad hearing, his knees are crap, versus in the game, like, one of the things that I liked, and I liked seeing people's comments about it online, is when I went into like one of the fights, first time I played it, I just went in guns blazing because that's just who I am as a person. I died right away because I just couldn't win. So I just said, screw it, I'm going to go in, and I stealth my way through it. And that actually was how I won some of the fights, because I was going to it pretty blind. And really, you can't have somebody like that in a show really work. You can't have somebody crab walk around, stab people from behind, and make that be entertaining, because I don't know how, at least I don't think it could have worked as well, or even then, I just can't imagine some guy being basically a top-tier soldier taking down all these infected without anybody seeing him, when he really has had no training, because he mentions, like, early on in the game, he's just a guy who knew carpentry, I think, or he was a construction worker. He wasn't a soldier. He was just really a guy at the end of the day. Yeah,
well, and that's an interesting way to put it, because it feels like, and I read about it in the They Shouldn't Have Killed His Dog, the oral history of John Wick, where they talk about part of what made like Die Hard so popular is, and why Die Hard changed the action event or the action genre in general, is that John McClane was a regular dude.
Yeah.
He wasn't some special ops guy that was taking down this terrorist group. He was just an off-duty cop trying to get back to his family.
Yeah.
And I think we do definitely see that continuation here into The Last of Us, where he's just a regular guy, but he's good at what he does. But to be fair, we don't know 100% at this point, and I don't know if they ever explored in the next game or what they're going to do in the next season. But we know Joel's been doing bad shit since his daughter died. So
like they
could have picked up a sleight of hand.
I mean, I'm also at the point where, I mean, this is something that I didn't really get to because I'm not a parent, and remember when this show came out, I was talking to my dad about it. I mean, it kind of makes sense because he really was bloodlusted. I mean, he obviously had a chip on his shoulder about the world. I'm sure that losing a kid would definitely make you anchor enough to do things like that and make you see things differently. But even then, like, there are just some things in there I'm like, there's no way anyone would have picked it up unless either you learned from somebody else, or you were just pushed to that point where you had no other choice, and that's how you learned how to do specific things. Some of it I can guess, some of it others, like, somebody had to have taught him that, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, no, it's speculation until it's actually fully revealed. But one thing I think that's interesting is just how sensitive the show is, but also good at showing the resilience of everyone and just how humans survive. And I mean, you brought it up a little bit earlier where it's hard to stray from a good guideline. I mean, and also you have the guy who was one of the creators of the series. So
this is his baby, for all crying out. Like, he knew what was going to happen to this. He knew what was going to do everything his way.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of weird though too, because after the first episode, this episode goes by so quickly.
Yes, it does feel like the pacing on the second episode is much quicker. And I think part of that is just because we don't have to do any world building anymore. Like, we already know what's happening, and for the most part, granted, there's like questions, there's mysteries, but like we now can pick up the pace as far as like, all right, we have an objective, we have a world, we have our characters, we can get the ball rolling.
Yeah, it's like talking in Hellraiser, where you're centering the story around people and introducing little tidbits of the world as you're going.
Yeah.
That way you're making it a relatable experience instead of, oh, we gotta build the lore and everything of this world right from the get-go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is a quick episode because really they have that little bit of exchange, and then they get to the capital and Tess dies.
Yeah.
The only thing they really didn't do a whole lot of, which is something I've noticed in the entire show as well, with kind of ties into, I guess, a little bit of being less is more, but they don't really show the infected off a whole lot in these first 2 episodes, besides like little here and there moments, because like in the games you were constantly running into them, and that makes sense. You can't just have all these areas of run through here, scavenge a bit, run through here, scavenge a bit, maybe fight a guy here and there. Clickers only, or most of the infected only really pop up until later, and even then the clickers are only in like 1 or 2 scenes in the museum, I think, if I'm correct.
Yeah, so the infected, and that's the one thing I noticed too, and I wish that they had used them a little bit more in the story and as obstacles, instead of the whole men are evil or humanity is the true evil. Because you're right on that. They only show up at that scene in the episode where, or what is it, the 5th and 6th episode when they're in Kansas City.
Yeah, that's like, we'll get to that later, but the episode with like I can't remember their names, but it was with Sam and Henry when they were with that group. That's what, like, really when we saw them, besides just like 1 or 2. This is like, oh, this is a horde. Finally, we're seeing what they all look like.
I just realized what they did with them. They used them actually, that's kind of interesting. They use them minimally, but they use them as plot devices, as an action happening to force the characters to advance and do something else.
Yeah. And I agree, like, it would have been nice to see more of the infected, just from, like, a zombie standpoint. But at the same time, like, it is so easy to have it be accidentally lumped in with all of the other Horde movies, and TV shows.
Yeah, like Walking Dead Season 2, where I left off, where all of it's just them constantly hiding on the highway, and it's like, this is boring as shit.
And honestly, the only ones that did that sort of style of, like, there's a mass of either zombies or whatever have you, like, as the enemy of the show or movie, like, the only ones that really managed to stand out are ones that chose to take humor and, like, extreme humor or extreme fighting styles. Those are the ones that managed to stand out, because even though these zombies are very unique and they look very different, once you get a mass of something, you really do lose it.
Yeah, they're just another variation.
Exactly. So while I agree, like, the game does a good job of, like, how many there are and, like, trying to push you along and keep you paced, I do understand why the TV show would, like, try and hold off on them a little bit, just so that we have time to, like, really get invested in these people.
Yeah. Because, again, that's something you can do with the game, is the purpose of having them as an obstacle to spread the story out. So,
That being said, though, when you actually get to see the clickers, I was very happy with how they looked. They looked right out of the games. The fact that they actually pulled the same, either they brought back the same voice actor for them, or they just pulled the audio. Like, I was very happy the way they turned out. I remember seeing the trailer and seeing the face of the clicker. I'm like, please be just as good as this. And I mean, I personally was very excited with this, considering, I mean, I used to actually like zombie movies, and just seeing all the makeup effects of people over time, like classic George A. Romero, where he just still is probably one of the best out there still. And just seeing how it went to CGI with the World War Z, which I don't love, obviously, but just getting to see them and seeing how practical is always going to be better. I'm sure you know what I mean. Practical is always going to be better. It'll always age better. CGI is great, but might not always age well. And this, I'm happy with the way it turned out. I couldn't have asked for anything more with it, to be honest.
And that's exactly what it is practical and CGI are always going to be of their time.
Yes.
But of that time changes drastically in technology. Because, like, if we go back to, like, old monster movies, the practical effects aren't very good, but that's what makes them of their time. Same with, like, going back to old CGI movies, where they're not good, but they're of their time.
True. I do think, though, that Last of Us's practical effects were like they spent more time and money on them than I think a standard HBO zombie show would bother to. Like, it would have been very easy to rewrite where it is standard blood and gore, a lot easier to do. It's already been done. We already know the methods behind it. Instead, they went ahead and like really invested in it, and it looked really good. And it kind of helped pave the way for these newer shows that don't necessarily focus on it, but like introducing that level of detail for practical with some CGI mixed in to spend the time and effort so that way we now have more that is similar. So like the upside down creatures in Stranger Things, like they could have cheaped out on that too, but like they already had proof that like if you go ahead and do it, even though it's a TV show, like people will be into it enough that you can sell figurines and you can sell shirts, and like it will make up for it in the money realm, which then like even though it's kind of stupid and I don't love it, but like it does in the end mean that you get cooler looking stuff.
True.
So
let's move on to episode 3, Long Time, which kind of the name's interesting in itself because I love you long time, or we'll be together for a long time. It goes both ways.
It does.
But this episode is a little bit more explanation of the death of the uninfected early on, as well as amidst the mass panic that we have. But most of this episode focuses around Bill and Frank, a pair living in isolation in an abandoned town. One thing I caught on early on with this episode is the first, and I didn't realize this until we got to this episode, the first 2 episodes are relatively warm in their color palettes. Like with the setting of the sun and everything, it just makes it feel warmer, like
almost Western style.
Yeah, sun setting, like
a lot of browns, a lot of rich tans, rust colors.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then this one goes to a stark, drastic cold with blues and greens. And it kind of works with reflecting on Joel dealing with Tess's death.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, which this is the one where we see, what was it? Was it a bus or we see a plane crash, and we also see piles of dead bodies where they buried people that were mass murdered before they knew what was going on. And also there's some parts of this that I know. I messaged you on this, Cal. This is probably the episode that I've
been waiting for this episode.
The most complaints about.
I figured.
For starters, I have no issues with the side story itself. It's a cute little story.
Yeah.
But it's 45 minutes to explain why Joel's stopping at a house.
I agree. Again, I get it. I understand why the pacing is good, the story is good, but again, like, it is a commitment to watch these suckers, especially if you're going to watch all of them.
Yeah. Were they even in the game, Cal? I can't remember.
So that's actually something that I was really... Okay, well, first, that actually makes sense at your point, because I thought you just didn't like it and had other reasons, but that makes sense. But anyways, Frank was in the game, but there's actually, you find him in a different way, so you don't really get to know him at all. So you meet Bill because he owes Joel a favor, so you have to go across to get him anyways. You go through his town. So when you meet him, he's still kind of the same cold, guarded off guy, doesn't want to talk. Same idea, you go to get a car as well, but right when you're about to go and figure out a plan, because the war you were supposed to go to originally didn't work out, you actually find Bill's or Frank's body, and he hanged himself. And they don't really go into the romance a whole lot in the game, which is funny. I feel like an idiot when I realized this, but he calls him his partner a couple times. When I first played it, I didn't really put two together that he meant like love partner. For some reason in my head said business partner. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. Obviously, they were very close. They were best friends.
I too
live
with
once
my
I saw the show,
partner.
and I'm like, and then once I saw the show, and I'm like, oh God, you're an idiot. But anyways, so you don't really get to see, Frank besides his body there at the very end. He only really talks about Frank like a handful of times, and even then, it's very. Once he mentions it, he's like, all right, let's drop it, or hey, let's move on. So this is why I enjoyed this episode so much, is because we don't really get to know Bill in the game besides him just being very paranoid, very doesn't trust anybody. And this, I mean, first off, just Nick Offerman was very well cast. Like, I actually was very happy that he was picked. I wasn't 100% on board with him, but they were on a good track record. So I'm like, okay, he's going to nail it. I know he's gonna. I haven't seen him do anything bad yet. And I really enjoyed getting the chance to know him as well. Just seeing kind of why the way he is instead of just being some guy you just find out of the blue. Something I actually didn't realize till after I saw the episode was the show starts in 2003. Bill and Frank never actually got to see gay marriage get legalized in the U.S., and that kind of sucked for the two of them because how obviously they were very much in love with each other, and they never got to see really their own, I guess, having the chance to marry themselves in I don't know the right word.
The end of the world gave them freedom.
Basically, yeah. Like, that's something I actually was really upset they never got the chance to experience it like everybody else did, and I'm sure that's something they would have loved to have done. But
yeah.
Anyways, I want to little rant. What were you about to
say? Oh no,
I
was just gonna say, like, yeah. I mean, it's a cute story. It's nice. It's heartwarming. But and here's the thing. So when I was watching this, I'm like, okay, cool. We're gonna do kind of like a little World War Z thing where we get these little vignettes of how people survived during the pandemic or during the whole thing. And it's like, okay, well, I'm sitting there and it's like it goes on for like 10 minutes. I'm like, when's Joel going to show up? And then Joel does show up like 20 minutes after that. And it's just like for like 2 minutes or like not even 2 minutes, like a minute to have lunch with them. And then he moves on. And it's like, okay, I get what you guys are doing. You're trying to expand the world. You're trying to show different points of view from what's going on this. But none of this matters to the story at hand with Joel and Ellie.
Yeah, like, at the end of the day, like, when I really looked at this objectively again, like, if I just skip this episode, you really wouldn't lose a whole lot besides, like, there's only, like, 2 really big takeaways that are important. Like, they mentioned flour or sugar were possibly how the infection got started. Because if you notice, right early on, he says pancake batter, he stops. And then I think back to the first episode where he couldn't make pancakes, they're out of it. And there's another scene at the very end, which, like, kind of ties into what you guys were mentioning early on of, you guys are saying it as you have to do it to help somebody, because if you just help yourself, you're dead. Kind of like in that letter, basically, he had said to Joel, you need to find your purpose and don't let Tess go. And of course, Tess is dead, and that's why he's so messed up.
And that's a good point. That is a good point. I even have that noted there that it exists to give Joel the motivation to go on, but we don't. As far as we know,
if you didn't see it,
as far as we know, he's only met Bill and what's the other guy's name? Bill. He's only met Bill and Frank once.
Yeah, I do think.
Oh yeah, right.
I agree. They do a great job of expanding the world and the like side characters. It's I think the reason it feels awkward for you, especially because like how long we do spend looking at their lives in the TV show, is like you said, like it's just this one instance and then we move on.
Mm-hmm.
Like it would be interesting to see a way of like slipping that information in a little bit more throughout like other pieces of the episode, even if it's like background bits, just because like in the video game you have a little bit more freedom to find and like look at and listen to the recordings at your own speed, so you can like and you can revisit some of it, so like you have time to like bring it all together and like have it feel more cohesive, I think, than like being forced given a timeline.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, this episode does a handful of other interesting things too, in regards to, like you mentioned, that flour and pancakes, that they couldn't get a hold of it, but it's this show does a good job of making like little jabs at our modern society.
Yeah, that's true.
Main food supply, when that's cut off, everyone's screwed. I mean, it's something that I talked about in college when we were talking about infrastructure, and people were proposing like, well, what if we have one lane with this is where your power comes through, this is where your water, this is where all this stuff is generated. We just use the modern infrastructure and just expand upon it. And my thought's like, what if a terrorist attack happens? Any of these, like,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah, look at Texas. They have one power supply or power grid. Their grid went down. They were screwed.
I know you don't watch it, but I do faithfully. In one of the episodes on Phineas and Ferb, the hometown of the bad guy Doofenshmirtz, is his entire country is run off of like one big post that runs the entire length of the country and is turned by goats, and everyone just like loops belts to this post. And it feels very much the same way, but like in a kid format where like in that one, like one set of the goats on one end get turned around and they refuse to go the other way. And in this instance, we have a very like real world example of like all of our flours coming from pretty much one manufacturer, one supplier. And yeah, like this is granted a little bit more of an extreme, and like there is more, like there's always more to the real world than what like TV world and video game world lets on, because like otherwise it would be a very boring TV show. But like it is an interesting concept of like we do have, and like more than people realize, like a lot of like this is the only thing that makes fill in blank here. Like you think you have choices, but you really don't.
Yeah. I mean, we've really gone down to like monoculture food produce. We don't have a lot of heritage unless you go to like, or heirloom crops unless you go to farmers markets, and even then that's limited, or go to like a specialty store.
Yeah, and that changes like how accessible that is to people. Like it's a sad fact, like this is the most accessible way to get stuff to people, is making it in this mass, but the show does a great job of expanding on like how no one notices these little like threads that are connecting all of this, and how like by the time people realize what's happened, it's way too late.
Which ties into what I like about Bill's character is the conspiracy theory side of all this stuff.
Yep.
Because the moment there's like a guy who's like turning off the cameras, he's waiting for them. We're like, okay, cool, we're doing conspiracy theory. And then Nick,
yes,
he pulls off the mask. It's like
that's basically Nick Offerman. What are we kidding?
Okay,
about?
Yeah, Nick Offerman. I was trying to think of his character from Parks and Rec.
Yeah.
I don't remember Ron Swanson.
Oh, Ron.
But again, I do like that it tries to expand the world. I just think it could have been used a little bit more impactfully instead of doing it because notoriously I don't really care for flashbacks.
Yeah, we heard.
I think it's a poor storytelling method unless it's absolutely necessary. If there's no other way to really tell it. And I think what they could have done to work it, and would have worked in probably with the game a little bit better, is if they came across them and spent like a day or two with them. If they had said, "Oh, remember you owe me that off," or here's how they could have fixed it, in my opinion. They could have said, "Hey, I'm here because you owe me, you owe me a favor."
Mm-hmm.
And then you go from there, and they spend a couple days resting, getting prepped, and then shit hits the fan, or it's like, "Hey, no, this guy's terminally ill. We're going to off ourselves, and you guys can take what you want." I think that would have been a better way to do it instead of 45 minutes.
However, I do think, while I agree, there's definitely a better way to do it just from like a storytelling standpoint. The effort that they put in to like make sure that they spent the time and effort to make these characters both real and well done was in the end worth it, because the second this episode aired, a bunch of idiots lost their mind and were like, "Oh my god, there are gays in the zombie apocalypse. How could there be?" And
I love seeing that debate or that discourse on Twitter. It was one of those like, this is really what people are taking away from this episode is, oh my god, it's an episode about two gay men. I'm like, seriously, that's really your big takeaway? Is just that? I'm like, stop going. Do me a favor and go off to Twitter, please. But I think this is where
like they're like, even though like I agree, there's definitely like ways to get around the flashback problem and like make these characters longer lasting and more impactful. I do think the way they handled it was really well done, because like while this episode aired and people were like losing their mind for no goddamn reason on Twitter, like they didn't have enough to stand on to be like, well, it's bad and like there's all like I'm being a horrible person. Because it was, even though it's not like a perfect episode, it was well written and thought through enough, and like that like there by the time episode 4 was over, like was on, everyone had forgotten about that, which was, I think, a really smart way of like preemptively being like, okay, we know this is going to be a problem. We know that people are going to watch this, be stupid. Let's go ahead and put the effort into making these characters as like well-rounded as we can, even though in the game you really don't have that.
It is what it is. I think it could have been done better, but just from a story point, it's.
But you also hate flashbacks.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, I notoriously do.
But like, I see your guys' points, because like I honestly, when I watched this, I really didn't have any complaints, and second time around, I'm like, okay, I do agree with your point about the length, but I'm like, overall, I still really enjoy it. But I definitely see your points, considering they could have been done a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, the first time I watched it, I had no complaints. I loved it.
Yeah, like it made me cry at the very, like, this was the up of The Last of Us. Like, I was so just taken back with, like, this is, oh my god, I'm crying to this episode right now. I never thought that was going to happen today, but I guess it's what I'm doing now, so.
Yeah, on a Wednesday.
Because here's the other thing. A few episodes later, we use flashbacks again, but we mix it in with the other stuff that's happening to, like, parallel the build-up, and they don't do shit.
Yeah, I do think the inconsistencies, though, like, they tried very hard to stick with that game, like, with the pacing that the game, like, if you play it, like, straightforward without doing any nonsense, like, they did a good job of trying to keep that pacing and, like, try to make it feel like if you'd already played the game, you didn't feel like you were missing anything or that they were doing anything too out of order or strange.
Yeah.
And so, like, yeah, unfortunately, like, there's definitely ways it could have been better from, like, just a TV and, like, storytelling standpoint, but I do really like that it felt so on point from the game, as far as, like, I didn't feel like I was missing anything. I didn't feel like, oh my god, they left out this entire section, or, oh, in the game this comes first, with a few exceptions.
Yeah, you actually bring up a good point that I want to get to about this, because I didn't get a chance to mention it, but so there's the reason why this is where they really had a first deviation, was just seeing Bill and Frank, but this is actually one of my favorite parts of the first game, is when you're going in to find a battery because you're trying to get a car. You run into the gym, and when you're in the gym, you think, oh, it's going to be fine. Well, it's not fine. You run into the bloater, and I remember the first time seeing it, I'm like, oh, this game is not even that hard. I don't know what Bill said it was hard. The bloater, I'm like, crap. And I got wrecked the first time I fought it, because I didn't know what I was walking into, and I didn't think to throw a Molotov. I thought, yeah, I could just beat it up with my melee, I'll be fine, but they don't have that scene at all, where you have to go into the gym and you have to see the bloater. And I was wondering, okay, they're not showing this. How are they going to incorporate this into the game, or into the show? Because bloaters are a very big part of it, and they're at least one of my favorite personal infected. Not that I have favorites, but definitely my favorite. And they also do something different this time, where Ellie, since none of these characters really ever interacted, they're never really at that house, Ellie finds her gun there, because at the very end she grabs Frank's piece and takes off with it, because Joel had said, you're not getting a gun, you're getting nothing. It isn't not until later on in the game, when she saves Joel out of the blue, she has a gun, and she's like, oh, yeah, I got this a while back, and they have a different, like, it still ends the same way when they have the confrontation between each other, but still, it's a little bit different the way they did it, which, I mean, doesn't really change it at grand scheme of things, but I thought it was just a nice difference, but they're still trying to show the same story.
Yeah, it's a way to work around a plot hole that they were kind of aware of from the game that they couldn't fix in the game.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a good point. Again, 40-some minutes to get there.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. Like, from specifically just a TV show standpoint.
Exactly.
But honestly, just the last thing before we go, I just never realized flashbacks really get you that much until now. I'm going to remember that for future, but I don't want to... let's go on the next episode.
Yeah, I need to find the movie with the most flashbacks.
I'm going to find a show with flashbacks now just to send to you.
Yeah. No, well, I've got one for you, Cal. The last 2 seasons of Naruto, my brother,
God,
was visiting my parents, and every single time he's like, if they're going to say... remember when, or this other line, this entire episode's going to be a goddamn flashback about shit that doesn't matter.
My husband tried to watch all of Naruto in kind of one sitting during the pandemic, and he had to look up a website that's lists out all of the flashbacks on which episodes, so he could skip huge chunks of Naruto.
Well, and I mean, there's movies where pretty much the entire movie is a flashback.
True.
But that's a completely different thing, what it actually leads up to,
No, I'm going to find one where it's a flashback inside a flashback inside a flashback.
I've got those.
If I have to... I'm going to save enough channel points just to find a show to give to you. Just so because I'm saving for something else right now, but now that I know you hate flashbacks, I'm going to Google one, find it just so I can redeem it. It's like, here, have fun. I know you're going to hate me, but have fun.
Fun. But yes, episode 4, Please Hold My Hand. At this point, we're going through Missouri, and we take a detour through Kansas City, where they're ambushed and they have to take shelter in an occupied zone. And then we were introduced to the brothers Henry and Sam in their plight for survival from being, I think, if I remember right, they were part of Fedra, and now this area is occupied by a rebel force that's, in a way, it's very much like what happened out in the East Coast with the CHOP. where they occupied an area and kind of policed it like a military a little bit, and but not to the extent of this, but it has similar feels, because that's why this is where I started to really pick up on this show, making the little jabs at our modern society.
I do think this one does it a little bit better than like some of the other zombie shows or movies tackled it, just because like it's part of it, it's like definitely a big part of the plot, but Joel and Ellie just kind of continue about their lives and are just like, well, another bullshit, another day. Whereas with other shows, they spend so much time like focusing in on like how these different groups work and how they came about. And it's like, I really don't care, because Joel and Ellie don't care.
Yeah. Well, exactly. Well,
like we get enough for them to be believable. They're based off of realistic situations. So like they feel grounded. They don't feel like Mad Max, where it's like, why is there a Thunderdome? I don't fucking know. No one does. But like, you also not spending so much time that you know like the entire hierarchy.
Well, they care and they don't care, because there's one part in the beginning of this episode where I'm sitting there and he's like, no fire, but then pulls out a big ass flashlight.
Yeah, totally different.
That's so much better, obviously.
Yeah, but I mean, it is an interesting part, just because we do, again, this is where we build up the world a bit more. We actually have flashbacks in this one too, a little bit here and there, but they're all done as a way to explain how Kansas City got to be in the state it's in. It's not even Kansas City, it's like 3 blocks of Kansas City.
Yeah, which I mean, I grew up in Kansas City. I mean, yeah, it's realistic enough that like none of these places, even though they are based very heavily in the real world, like none of them felt so like localized and specific like Zombieland, that like you're like, oh my god, that's just the Hollywood sign, this is silly. This one feels more like, oh, okay, that's somewhat believable. It is close enough to being Kansas City and Missouri that like, sure, that feels fine, without feeling too much like, look, we included your state.
Yeah.
You know?
Do they stop at Kansas City in the game?
I don't think it was... No, it was Pittsburgh. That's what it was. Because they actually changed some of the locations, which I'm sure there's a reason why I just didn't get a chance to look into it, but this is where they're in Pittsburgh, because I've never been to Pittsburgh, but I have friends who are from that area. They were pointing out, like, yeah, that's what this marks at. Like, they did a pretty good recreation of it for the most part.
Okay. Yeah, because I think probably what led to that is probably a money thing, because I'm sure it's cheaper to shoot or set it in Kansas City.
Yeah, and it's already got a lot of the like areas settled down, like situated, and also whether or not you like it, Kansas City is a very plain looking city. It is very easy to pretend to be in Kansas City, kind of no matter where you are, especially if you're not spending the entire episode being like, look at the Kansas City features.
Look at the Nelson Atkins Museum.
Please don't.
But
as an architect student, please don't look directly at the Nelson Atkins.
But I think it's an important part, especially in the world building, because it's starting to show that the further and further we're getting outside of Baltimore, outside of the federal controlled areas, it's a lot more archaic, and it feels more like the Wild Wild West and a less civilized, what we define as a civilized society, quote unquote civilized.
I also think that this managed to step itself away from other zombie movies versions of like small pockets of civilization by making them bigger pockets of civilization. Like they're still small. It's still like on the grand scale of things, not that many people, but it feels more populated than most zombie films where you're like, you are the only person out here, my home dog. Like you just are out here doing nothing. Like there's nothing between California and New York usually in those movies. Whereas this one, like, yeah, there are expanses between these civilizations, but they're close enough that it feels realistic. Like, okay, yeah, if, you know, pandemonium hit, what would be the next biggest area that people would gravitate to?
Yeah.
Like, all of the people in the Midwest don't just disappear during a pandemic. No,
we're pretty resilient.
Unfortunately.
So, and also from the game, I know the two brothers, Henry and Sam, are part of the game. Yeah. But if I remember right, they're like the two guys from the earlier episode or the last episode where they're not a big part of the story, but I remember feeling a lot more for them in the game because they're with you for that little bit more longer.
Yeah, so that's one of the things that they did differently again in the show, which I kind of like because they were just two random people you just kind of come across. Because I remember when you meet the two of them, you climb through a window, get punched immediately by Henry, and that's how you meet Henry and Sam. So they were kind of just passing by. It was one of those, oh hey, we're both similar age, let's just kind of stick together for now. And versus in the show, they made it that I might be getting something of it wrong, but he was in that city itself with the militia that overtook Fedra, and Fedra was asking for Kathleen's brother, I think, and he gave it up. He gave him up directly, which is why the manhunt started with him. That's why they're trying to search Kansas for him. That's why he's on the run, and Kathleen is just so hell bent on getting him because, like, for the most part in the game, you don't really. I didn't want to say care about those people, but like you really don't care about them. Like it happens the same way in the show where you're driving up on the truck. Same thing. Guy pretends he's injured when he's not. It's nothing. They like. That's why I like what they really did well with this is they take the time to know them, but at the same time, I also really didn't mind them as much because I already knew like I'm looking at all these characters. I'm like they're not going to make it. Like they're going to be dead in another episode or two. Like it's like something's going to happen to all of them. I also want to point something out because. I should have pointed this out with the other characters, but this is in this episode we get introduced to somebody named Perry, and Perry is actually Tommy's voice actor from the game, which I thought was really cool because this is the second actor they brought in from the games in the show because Marlene's actor is actually the same person who played her in the game. So I thought that was cool just seeing some of the actual voice actors just being a part of the show in some way, considering like I already heard Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson are going to be involved, but I was very surprised and I heard his voice. I'm like, that's Tommy. That has to be Tommy. Then I Googled. I'm like, oh, it is. He just has a very amazing beard. So
yeah, because also I know later on Ellie's mom is the voice actress for Ellie in the game.
Yeah, it was really nice to see those cameos.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about that later.
Oh,
but yeah,
sorry.
But we'll get to that. But I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts? Because like I said, I didn't know they were not going to do anything with those characters because they were trying to, but at the same time, like it wasn't going to make a difference because they were going to be dead by the end of one of these episodes. They were not going to last. Like you guys have actually kind of made a good point that I never really put two together about, but like a lot of the characters, we care about them, and then they're dead in the next episode. They're dead in that same episode. So
yeah, I mean, I care about them to a point because I had forgot about them from the game, and then I was sitting there thinking, I'm like. Oh, wait, I remember these two now. But I think this episode is a way to show kindred spirits and also just a waypoint to get them out. Again, it's another way to expand the world and how people are surviving under different conditions within this world. But yeah, it's the same with all the side characters as you get a little bit and then it's on to the next episode. Like I think every episode minus episode 3 and the last one, I want to say, are set up into like two episode chunks usually.
Yeah, and this definitely feels like it for sure. That also was probably the way they scheduled it too. I don't know if you remembered, but Super Bowl was that weekend, so they were going to air an episode that Sunday. So they had to air like one of these on the Sunday. Then next, I think 5 was on the Friday for that reason, because obvious reasons. So
yeah, well. What I think about this episode, too, is it's more so to show Ellie's capabilities, too, and show Joel transitioning away. Because not only does he find a kindred spirit, Henry's taking care of his brother, Sam, very much, very more fatherly than... Are they brothers or are they... Yeah, they're brothers.
They were brothers in both the game and in the show.
Yeah, so it's paralleling another character like Joel... and showing how Joel could have turned out if his daughter Sarah had survived. So it's used as a way to make Joel a little bit more relatable and show an opposite side of what he could have been, while at the same time this episode's showing him actually starting to train Ellie on like, hey, this is what you're going to need to do to survive out here, instead of it's starting to transition away from, oh, she's just a job, I got to get her from point A to point B, to, hey, if I don't make it, you're the hope for humanity. So I got to teach you how to survive now.
Yeah, that's one of the notes I started noting, because this is the first episode they really warm up to each other, because for the most part it was very what I say goes. Like he even mentioned the last episode, or I think it was this one, I don't want to talk about Tess, don't ever bring her up, versus now he's a little more open with himself. Like he mentions he loves coffee, which is something very often he sees you see in the show in the game, and he'll bring it up, and she never gets it, and that's one of the things they have with their I want to say dynamic of them being basically parent and child. Or she brings in the joke book, which I love because they bring this in throughout the entire game as well. Or he's starting to be a little more protective with her. He's starting to be a little more like he jokes with her. Like she'll make jokes to him, and he'll kind of make jokes back at the very end of the episode. Like he's finally, it's like you said, more than just cargo. Like I care about you as a person. More just let's get through this together and get this over with kind of thing.
Yeah. No, exactly. So, and I mean, it's also one of the shorter episodes too. I think it's only like 40 minutes or something.
Yeah.
Because it is just another stepping stone to set up to episode 5, Endure and Survive, in which they hatch a plan to escape. Because at the end of episode 4, that's when Henry and Sam meet Ellie and Joel, where they hold them at gunpoint. And now Sam and Ellie are friends.
I just have to bring up a point. Like, I don't know what Joel's plan was. Like, just putting glass in front of everything. And like, oh, don't worry, I'll wake up in time. Like, I don't know if you guys listening, but I'm like, that's not going to work at all. I remember watching the episode. It did not work because they got in right away. But do you guys have any thoughts on that? Because like, he's meant to be like basically a really tough hunter who everybody's terrified of. And this is the best thing he can do is just, we'll just put some glass from the door and I'll just lock it. We'll be fine. I'm sure we'll be fine. Don't worry.
As a light sleeper with 2 asshole younger brothers, I think it just depends on the situation that you're in. And I think people can get to that point, but I think it's also just a way of showing that maybe he's in a different environment, and so maybe he's not as on his game per se, because he might have thought that was the only way in, but the brothers obviously know there's another way in.
I also think it just does a really good job of like, because we've kind of just been told Joel is this like unstoppable force, kind of like Han Solo-esque in a way, where like we get told that he's this like amazing pilot, but like we really don't get to see it until later on in the movie. Same thing with here, like we get told Joel is like this amazing unstoppable person, but like in reality, like half of that's luck. And like he's even said himself, at least show Joel is like, I'm just a dude. Like
it
my
really
best idea when I was tired was to put down some crinkly paper and hope for the best. Like
I love that the show really leans more into him just being a guy who's not he's not a soldier, who's not a superhuman. Like in the game, like he's punching people like there's nothing. Like when I was replaying the game, I'm like, there's no way he wouldn't have broken his fist by now in the game or in the show. He breaks the first episode. He's like, it's fine, I'll have a fracture, but it still affects him for the rest of the show. Like I like that. Or he even mentions he's definitely on his right side, and then of course when they get caught by Sam and Henry, he was on his right side. So like I like that it leans more into him just being a dude who's just trying to survive and is a little bit better than some other people with shooting or combat. So
yeah,
and I also think it made it stand out because like most of our zombie shows and survival at the time was either like heartless badass who's like got survival skills, he's at least like lived out by himself and hunts for fun, or like is that MI6 level bad guy.
Ron Swanson personified.
Exactly, where it was really nice to be like, no, I'm just some dude. I happen to be fairly decent at it because I practiced all the time, and like, but I didn't start practicing until there was something to shoot at, which was zombies.
I mean, I personally, for this episode, I like it because it does expand on if this idea within horror films and movies in general about people learning lessons of not following the rules and you're punished for that. Basically, it's an idea of karma, where we get the people who tried to escape from the rebellion and they lived in the tunnels. But then one sick person got in because they weren't following the rules of keeping their distance, and that's how it breaks in again.
Yeah,
a little jab at
that's true
modernity. But it's also a good point because, honestly, we've seen the clickers in the one scene in episode 2, and this was the best spot to actually bring in the hordes of them. The only time we really see a horde of the infected, because at this point, they're pushed into a corner by a much bigger force that at that point, they have no way out. This is the end for them, and it's the clickers that or save them, but also damn the two brothers.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's this endurance and survival, which that again vignettes that we get to see along the way, but also developing Ellie and her fears of closeness because she gets close to Sam and look what happens.
I do think that the show does a good job of making Ellie very well-rounded and doing so over the course of a long enough time that it doesn't feel like, all right, this is the personality building episode. We put all of that in one go.
And I think onto that, because we're kind of leaning into episode 5 a little bit, because they're both kind of set like right around the same time frame, but I actually think they did that better in the show than the game, because in the game, she's just kind of there for him. They talk a little bit and they go to sleep, but he never actually reveals her he got bit. Versus in the show, she tries to save him and she feels so bad. And like at the very end of the episode, when she leaves the sketch pad on him, she even puts on there sorry, like I'm sorry, or I tried, or something. And I think that had definitely a bigger impact, because like even throughout the entire episode, getting to see the two of them together, because Ellie is the first person to make Sam laugh, and like even before that, he just was there drawing or painting. Sam was terrified. I mean, they even show like he was actually younger, I think, in this, which I think worked a lot better than I think he was closer to Ellie's age in the game.
No, it's a good episode, but it's, again, you get two characters that are short-lived, or not just two, an entire mass of characters that, while interesting in their own right, only serve as another waypoint for Ellie and Joel's story.
Yeah, the downfalls of zombies.
Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah. And that is a hard thing to balance, especially when it's not like Game of Thrones where everyone's dying in that, but you're emotionally invested in them because no one's safe. Whereas Ellie and Joel this whole time are the only safe ones, per se.
True.
So, and from this point, we do get to episode 6, but the next episode is Kin, where we arrive at Jackson, Wyoming, where Joel is reunited with his brother Tommy, who has set up a life for himself outside of what Joel did. He's settling down. And Joel is now having to have second thoughts on whether he can take care of Ellie. His fears are mounting because as Ellie's becoming more attached to him, Joel's starting to think more and more about Sarah. And so I think this one is a good one because it serves as both a stopping spot to develop Joel as a character and really bring him back to his brother. While also establishing that maybe there is hope after the shit show that we saw in Kansas City.
True. Yeah.
And I like around here's when they introduce his panic attacks where he just stops and can't do anything. And again, this is something that I like that they took the time to expand because, like I said, the show, he just kills without remorse. Like when you're killing people in the game, you hear Ellie will just be like, oh shit, or oh fuck, and just like that's about it. Like he actually feels bad because he's killed a lot of people, and they don't really, even in the show, in the game, they don't really go into specific details, but you don't really need to, because when he talks to Tommy, you already know what he's feeling. You know that he's killed a lot of people to survive. That he even said earlier on, I've been on both sides of in the truck before. Like, you can tell this is a guy who's seen a lot of shit in his life and has done things that he is not proud of, and seeing this vulnerable side to him where he breaks down to him, like, I don't think I can do this. Like, I don't think I can protect Ellie. I don't think I can do what I need to do. I loved seeing that because you don't really see any of that in the game. Like, he's just like, yeah, I killed those people, but it's fine. I blew their heads off with a shotgun. I burned them to death. It's fine. Let's move on to the next area. Take her, please. I can't do this. Like, it works better with the show, I think, personally.
Okay. So I really don't actually remember meeting the brother. Is it his brother he meets in the game? Or because I know we go to Utah, but didn't remember.
Yeah. So same idea. You don't, different, like I said, different way they did it in the show, but same idea. You go end up meeting him because he says you can take, Tommy will take you out to the Fireflies hideout. Same idea. They meet the area. They talk about things. Like, it's basically the same thing. It's just copy. It's slightly different, but same idea.
Yeah. And I do like this little bit of town. It definitely, the way it looks and the way it plays makes me think of how my parents described moving to Alaska in the early 90s. Where it was still civilized, but it still felt like the Wild Wild West. Like the Burger King was run out of some dude's van, and when he was out of burgers, he was out of burgers.
Yeah.
Like It just that feeling, and you still see some of it. So I think I personally like this episode just because it gives me that little bit of nostalgia for when I was younger. But I do think it is a great episode just in their development too of like if and again it's another character that's introduced to show what could have happened with Joel is if he had followed in his brother's footsteps, he could have lived a more peaceful life and made a life for himself. But because of Sarah, he's had to move on, and it's taken Ellie to bring him to realize, hey, I need someone in my life that I can take care of. So, and it's a weird way because I know this episode jumps like 3 months from Kansas City, and what they do, what it does too, is it also shows that Ellie is now attached to him, and she doesn't want to go with anyone else. It's not that it's not that his brother couldn't do a good job, but Joel's the one who actually understands her and is going to look out for her, because now she'd have to rebuild up that relationship with a stranger that she kind of knows but doesn't know at all.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And, like, you really feel like the two of them finally feel like a duo again instead of just being Karka. They're finally, like, really opening up to each other. They feel like they can talk about things. Like, it really, like, this is, like, their very first fight they have. Like, well, I don't even want to say even fight, but even then, like, this is the first time where Joel is like, no, and we're going to drop this and leave it at that. When she goes back into the house and Joel was just talking to her about Sarah, and, like, you could just see the immediate change in him to begin with. Like, it's the first time it actually really affects him besides Tess directly.
And that's one thing that also we see with Joel is he does suppress his, I'll say, darker side when he's around Ellie. Like he still is that protective father that even though the world's gone to shit, he's still trying to keep her safe and keep her a little bit sheltered from some of the realities of what people have to do to survive.
Yeah, definitely. He's definitely,
like they even like alluded to that a little bit one of the earlier. Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was just saying like he definitely has seen her and like treating her more like his own kid as opposed to just like I gotta haul this thing or this person to a place.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely like this is the episode where like he really like lets that bond not only like develop but also like show. He's no longer like, all right, well, other people are around. You know, this is the kid. Now it's my kid.
Yeah.
They kind of like lean in a little bit in one of the earlier episodes where they're walking past the mass grave and he says, "Don't go ahead. Trust me, don't go ahead." And she just doesn't listen because it's a kid. It's not going to listen to an adult. And she kind of is like, "Oh, now I know what you mean." Like, and they just keep building upon that more and more.
Well, and that's actually something important too, because Joel really can't handle another Sarah, but he needs to have that Sarah because even though he had the relationship with Tess, we're over Tess by now.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just showing that he needs someone in his life constantly in order to be a good person. Otherwise, he's going to stray into being a bad person.
I also think that this episode finally like hits home on like it's not just about being in a group, which is how a lot of the zombie shows specifically like treat it, where it's like, well, as long as you have a group, that's better than being out there by yourself. This one does a good job of being like, well, yeah, a group is good, but like having that specific person by your side can make the end of the world tolerable.
Exactly. But a couple things I think is interesting about this episode, and I don't know if a lot of people picked up on it, but it's an episode not only to give hope, but it also does a good job of mimicking early civilization just a little bit in regards to that horses are a commodity. But there's also, it's a small little line. And I had watched like a few months ago a video on the history of why pork is taboo in certain religions. And part of it is because it's seen as a poor meat is partly because pigs and sheep are usually the first signs of civilization, and it's the first domesticated, stable meat products that people can raise and grow relatively quickly. So in the show, they talk about, oh, they're raising their sheep and their pigs. It's like, okay, you guys know a little bit about what you're talking about. You're just not throwing out pigs and sheep just because, that'd be an interesting animal besides cows to have.
Well, also, sheep and pigs are... easier to get on set. Cows are notoriously hard to work with. But also like they are small enough that it's easy to like show an audience like enough of them being around, and it's like something that we still have in our cultural lexicon to be like, oh well, sheep, like in the general lexicon people are like, oh, sheep, that means you get wool and you get all this meat and like you could potentially do a milking sheep, whereas in reality, like if you actually are around these animals, you know, like maybe it depends, there's more to it than all of that, but like the general audience already has this like base idea of like what it kind of sort of takes to raise them, and has all agreed like, yes, those ones I understand enough to be like, yeah, that makes sense. Whereas if like someone had an alpaca, which reasonably would be easier and healthier for like a civilization to start over with, like doing llamas and alpacas, arguably depending on where you are, like, but if you saw a herd of alpacas in like an apocalyptic show, you'd be like, I have questions.
Yeah, but it's a solid episode. I mean, it's one of those ones where I know why they stopped by so quickly is because there's really not a lot that goes on with him and his brother.
True.
I wish they had made it a little bit more of a warm. I mean, it's a warm episode, but I wish they'd lingered a little bit, just that tad bit longer to make their relationship feel a little closer than like, cool, bro, got a piece.
Yeah, end of the world. Nice to see you.
Yeah, and I kind of wish like they took the time to show their relationship a little bit more, like in the first, because it's like a 20-year time jump. Just seeing them do what they were doing, because like they allude to it, they talk about it, they don't really go into detail. Like it's really in the second game, you notice a lot more of Tommy, how he's just like Joel, but that's a topic for another day, obviously. And so we don't get off too off topic of it, or so we can say on it. I liked how when they were at the very end of the episode, they still were. I don't know how much I love it, but still, they at least try to follow what their game was doing. They end up at the university. They go through everything pretty fast, but there's no big fight. There's just one really small fight they have, and Joel gets stabbed, and it kind of does put Ellie at the very end of the episode where like he was trying to teach her how to do things and try to get her like, hey, if I die, you're on your own. She basically is on her own for the very first time, and is like, what do I do, Joel? Because he's not going to get out of that bed at all, and he's stuck there for the next few episodes.
Yeah.
So
well, and that's a good point too, especially how we talked about how in one regard the show's able to expand upon the world where the game can't, but in the other side it can condense areas that are kind of padded areas to extend how long the game's going to last.
True.
Into these quick little skirmishes that does exactly what it needs to do without being overly long.
True. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. Like that university was a good section. Like, even then you have to run around and find stuff and get plug-in generators to go. Like, it's not like it's a short section. I'm actually glad they kind of sped through it, if anything, even though there's some really good, like, recorders you find of explaining what happened and how, like, they piece together in the show. But even then, like, just seeing that more depth that you can get a chance to look into.
Exactly. And, I mean, it's a good... here's why it's also good. I don't think we've had a good cliffhanger since the first episode.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
That's always the hard thing with TV shows is keeping that interest going. And okay, well, I watched that chapter. Yeah. What makes me want to read the next chapter, really? But
you also don't want it to be, Dr. Hunk level cliffhangers where it's every single episode and every single episode someone's on the verge of death or marriage.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
But yeah, from here we go to episode 7, Left Behind, which just makes me think of that shitty fucking book series that turned into a Nick Cage movie.
They're so bad.
But Ellie and Joel are stuck around, or Joel's stuck around an abandoned house, and we have a bit of this. This is where I think they did well enough with the flashback. I know you don't care for this flashback as much, Cal, and I completely understand after having finished the series. In regards of like how they presented the flashback and or like Ellie's story of how she became bitten.
Yeah.
But this is the episode where most of it's a flashback of Ellie in her Fedra military school, while present day Ellie is struggling to keep Joel alive.
Mm-hmm.
So we have, and the reason I think this flashback works well is that we're giving two different personalities to Ellie, and this is the episode that is to build her as a character, to give her entire backstory, like we got Joel's in the first episode.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also like a reversal of roles, and it's her time to actually shine as really being on her own and left behind, both in the context of her past and in the context of Joel.
Sure. Yeah, I can see it.
My big thing with this was it's just one of those, like, it's the book versus the movie debate, and I think this is one of the times the game just did it much better. Like, I don't hate this episode. I actually still really enjoy it. It's just, it really comes back to the infected that I said to you earlier, how they're just not even in that, like, in the mall itself, like, there's a lot more sex with expanded, and you run into more infected. They were just only one infected that entire mall. And I just had a hard time believing there would be only one really sitting there. Like, I just couldn't buy that personally, but at the same time, I did like seeing the two of them together, because this is basically Ellie's episode. This is all about her and learning about Riley, someone she's only mentioned like twice up to this point. And you could tell whenever Riley came up, she was very visibly affected, because like in the first episode, Marlene mentions Riley, and of course Ellie's being herself, just not really caring, cursing them out. Then as soon as she says Riley, she immediately is like, okay, and takes her seriously. But I don't know. I still say the game did it better personally, but for what they did very well. I'm not going to disagree with that.
Yeah, isn't in the game that part of the story a bonus episode?
Yeah, so that's actually a DLC they did that basically got added to every edition, where you so same idea, you go into the mall itself, but there's a modern section where you're trying to find supplies for Joel and medical supplies, and then it cuts to a flashback of when Ellie was there before with Riley, and it talks about their relationship and how that night they spent together, how they had some fun, showed her the wonders of the world, and then it kind of goes back and forth between playing as Ellie, trying to find supplies and trying to help Joel and running into groups of people, and then going back to Ellie again with Riley. Okay. So
yeah, I do think it's a good part to the story, and I'll get into the last episode of where I think it would have worked better. But it does show the reckless abandon, and it's a way to spread out her care for Joel, because otherwise that section is really quick, because because it's a way to give another episode, give Ellie more of a backstory than what we've seen before, but also pad out the show too, because otherwise, game-wise, I remember Joel gets stabbed, and then we cut to playing as Ellie.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. It's like one scene or two, and then the next thing you know, it's, hey, where's Ellie now? Figure it out. Everything's different now.
Yeah, yeah. And it's just shows the follies of youth and all that. It's not a bad episode. Just,
yeah.
I think a better use of flashback than episode 3.
I also think part of the reason that this flashback feels a little bit more natural, at least from what I've picked up from other flashback complaints you've had, is that this one happens simultaneously with other stuff happening in the real world, as opposed to just like, oh, let me stare mindlessly at this abandoned home and remember my long lost dead ones.
Yes.
Which, like, I agree. I do think, like, especially because games and books, like, that's a very natural thing to have, like, two storylines happening simultaneously, because you're able to do that switch. I think this one was a closer effect to having that happen.
Yeah, it's a better use of parallel action, is what it is.
Without having, like, two things that the audience needs to, like, really be keeping track of. It does feel like stuff is happening, like, they're not just standing there, like, ripple dissolving into, like, the future to have this flashback. It does feel like things are, like, continuing while the audience gets caught up.
Yeah. And honestly, from here, because if I remember right, this is like the last long episode, because the next two episodes are only, what, like 40, 50 minutes?
Yeah. I was surprised, but at the same time, they didn't waste a single moment in 8 and 9, because 9, I was surprised that it was only going to be an hour long. I actually was concerned, because I'm like, they're maybe going to botch this, but they obviously didn't, I personally. But yeah, this was the last long episode. Everything else was at least like only about an hour, and that was maybe 50 minutes and 10 minutes of credits, I think, of anything. So
exactly, because I was watching, I'm like, okay, there's another hour, and then they had the credits, and then they had bonus stuff after it on stream.
Yeah,
so
there we go.
The episode's actually only like maybe 30, 35, 39 minutes.
Yeah. Which honestly, I think the pacing for that really worked out well. Like episode 8 and 9 feel very like concise, but also like we still get quite a lot of emotion and understanding of the characters being built here. And like, we're also not being drugged through the very end in episode 9, where like we could have spent a lot more time debating the humanity of that situation. But instead we're like, let's just go.
Yeah. Cause episode 8, When We Are in Need, Ellie is still keeping Joel alive, but she runs into David, a preacher in a town that is very much Donner Party like.
Mm-hmm.
And this is like the true corruption of humanity. And Joel also awakens, get his shit done, and they both escape. But this episode, I think I like the game version better because this is the part I remember heavily. Because when Joel wakes up and you start going out to find Ellie, and the reason I like the movie, the show, or the game better is the part when you realize, oh, they're cannibals.
Yeah.
Because the show from the very beginning is like, they're eating people.
Yeah, they're not sneaky.
Yeah. They don't hide that.
But it's also to show that Ellie has learned how to survive on her own without Joel for the most part. I mean, she's still a little girl, so of course against two full-grown men, or a group of grown men, she can't really do anything. But what I liked in the game is the moment when you're like slowly going through the freezer, and you act like you stop. Like when I was playing, I was kind of looking down, and then I looked up, and it's like, oh, those are bodies, and like in a cold storage freezer.
Yeah. It had a very good like horror-esque element to it.
Yeah.
Whereas I think the show definitely was like much more straightforward about it. And like I get it. I understand like why we are focusing more on like the more religious aspect as opposed to like the shock horror value. But I did like the game a lot for just the visuals, really.
Yeah. And it does get to the good part of having a fake idol. Infection still alive in her and whatnot, of like people are still scared even though they're so far away from civilization. And now it's not even the infection they're afraid of, it's starvation that they're afraid of.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I mean, it hits the main parts of the game in a quick, concise manner.
Yeah, exactly. Considering they don't waste a single moment on everything. Everything has a purpose, I think, for the most part. Like, they don't really waste time trying to set up this group. They just show they're there, and the next thing you know, they run into Ellie the next scene, and they have their conversation. Also, this is where Troy Baker finally makes his appearance, because I was wondering for a good while if he was going to end up being David, and he ended up being the second guy in command at this point. But that didn't waste a single moment at this point. And what else is there? I like that we finally get to see, this is where I was really happy, where they did not hold back at all, was when Joel gets to come out and actually gets to be the monster that like he's been like you mentioned earlier, Chris. This is a lot of a lot of telling, not showing. And for the most part, I mean, he's been really lucky. He's gotten some good shots. Ellie saved his butt earlier in one of the earlier episodes. Really, this is where we get to see him come out and like, okay, now I'm pissed. And like that interrogation scene, the fact that it was pretty much exactly the same as the game, minus what I noticed is when they're trying to recreate from the game itself into the show, they mirrored actually, which just thought was interesting. But like that scene where he was interrogating the two guys, I'm like, yes, this is what I've been waiting to see. This is what I've wanted to see out of Joel from the very beginning. Like, I'm liking that they actually saved this, because when it comes out, it's a 0 to 100 moment, and I was like, these guys are so freaking dead. Like, they're not going to last.
No,
I mean,
exactly.
obviously they wouldn't, but still. But like that, and also Pedro just nailed that scene. Like, Troy Baker just nailed that scene as it is in the game, and I knew that when Pedro was going to bring it there, he was going to bring it and give his A game, and I love that scene. So and even just getting to see more like another episode of Bella Ramsey just nailing it, like when at the very end of the episode when she's there with David and their conversations, and how David is creepy as hell to her the entire time, and how when she gets a chance to finally like go nuts with the fire around her, it was just very well done. I think that like another moment, I'm glad they didn't decide to hold back on it and water it down. They just basically took the game and said, okay, we're going to make it in live action now, and that's the only difference.
Yeah.
And still making that jab at society and aspects of religion,
but without feeling like it was too preachy.
Exactly. And the reason it doesn't feel preachy is because they don't hang on it. It's not the purpose of the episode. It's just an aspect of the preacher that it's like, okay, yeah, he's a pedophile.
Yeah, like it just feels like it flows so seamlessly that we don't have to spend time going through like anything more. You can just let the audience be like, all right, well, yeah, you've laid out all the facts for me. We don't need more details. Like,
no, exactly.
And like in the game, like you kind of think David is sketchy, but like you don't really have any reason to when you first meet. Like he just seems a little bit off. And I know the voice actor Nolan North he was Nathan Drake. Like he's been in a lot of things. So, like when I heard his voice, I'm like, I couldn't register. I'm like, why do I not trust you? But like something about you I just can't trust. And David same, like from the beginning, I'm like, I don't trust you immediately. Like I can't figure out why, but I just can't. And then we see more about him as it is. So.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So now we get to episode 9, Look for the Light, where finally we reach the Firefly headquarters, where they're trying to find a cure, but it turns out that the cure is going to, or their attempts to find the cure is going to kill Ellie, because, fun fact, there's other immune people, and they've done this experiment on them, and they've died again and again. And so this is again where we see Joel can't handle another Sarah, and so he does what he has to do for someone else. He's not doing it for himself. He's doing it for Ellie and keeping her alive with a decision that Ellie has no say on at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, like they did. Like it's something I didn't even like from the beginning. Like they didn't even ask her for consent, and like I'm sure she probably would have said yes, but they just immediately were like, "Nope, we're gonna do it anyways. We can't. We have to do this." And just how wrong they were going about this, because, well,
they didn't even
that's
let
also
them say goodbye.
Yeah, like I think if anything, if Marlene really cared and wanted to do this right, she would have at least let Ellie choose, number one, and number two, she would have at least let them say goodbye to each other. Like, I'm sorry, like I know this is what we said we're going to do for months. I'm sorry we're here, but we have to do this because this is for the better of humans. But nope, it was just, yeah, sorry, you have to go. And I'm like, really? Like, you don't expect him to be like a little bit pissed off? Like, come on, Marlene. Like, this is the guy who got her across the country. Like, clearly he didn't do this by being nice. He did this by being a monster for a reason.
Yeah.
Also, did want to mention, this is also Ashley Johnson's appearance in the game, in the show, and she also was the one who voiced Ellie. And I thought how poetic it is that she gave birth to Ellie in the show, and how, I mean, it was Ellie giving birth to Ellie in a way, which I love that they actually got to incorporate her. But
I personally kind of wish they kept it a mystery for a little bit more on how she became immune. I thought it was a little weak in the fact that, oh, she's immune because her mom got bitten.
I mean, it is.
It's weak. It's weak.
It is.
I agree.
A very well used stereotype. Let's just say that.
Yeah, but
they didn't really even go into it in the game. They just said she was just immune. How is she immune? That's just it. Like, never really. And I think I'd prefer that than giving a reason, because not everything has to have a reason. We could just, leave it to interpret ourselves. Or heck, I don't need to know an answer to everything in a story. I could just live like that way and be okay with it. But
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, real quick, back to here's what I think Marlene, why she failed, is because I think she hired Joel thinking he was going to be the guy just to get the job done. She wasn't expecting him to have that emotional attachment. So Joel was the right person for the job until he became attached to Ellie. Well, or until he had to take her from point B across the rest of the world.
Yeah.
Or US.
I also think that the show does such a really great way of like framing her out as like her trying to come across as like very business and like, no, this is for the good of the world. But it's her errors are so easy for the audience to see and like grasp very quickly without having to be told them, that it makes her an easy bad guy without having to like sit down and be like, well, this is why she's in the wrong. This is where it could have been better. Even though we're about to watch our like goody two shoes father figure massacre the entire hospital. Yeah. Well, it feels justified.
Yeah. And then him lying to Ellie is a good point too, of like, it's building up the tension for season 2.
Oh no, this is a fantastic way to do a cliffhanger. No one's in like dire peril, but like there is tension there.
I just look forward to seeing how they're going to do season 2 at this point, because let me ask this, because I don't want to go into too much about this, because just since it's your show and I'm just really your guest here, but how much can I talk about The Last of Us episode, or Last of Us 2? Because there's very important parts in here that I kind of want to touch upon that I'm kind of glad they showed, but at the same time, if you guys don't think about it, you want to go in fresh, or you want to go a different way, or for your viewers, how much can we talk about this?
This is Nicho's problem.
We'll save it for season 2 and have you back for that one.
Yes.
Awesome.
Because I am all for spoilers. Nicho, however, doesn't even like watching trailers.
Nope.
He's told me that before in streams, but
yeah.
Okay, then I do want to touch upon a couple things here, at least. One, Laura Bailey makes a cameo. She's actually one of the voice actors for a character in The Last of Us 2, which we'll get more into later eventually. She's actually one of the surgeons. Another point here where I like that less is more. They show that Joel is a monster again. They show that this is a guy who survived for 20 years. Like, I like that they actually didn't show anything besides just him shooting in the background music, because that just, again, less is more. And just seeing like people who were surrendering, and he didn't give a shit. Like, this is a guy who just this is where I'm glad they decided to hold off on him being violent the whole time, because if it was violent the whole time, it would just been the game again. This is seeing him. This is a parent this isn't a guy who's a hunter. This is a parent who's pissed that you took his kid away and you didn't even give him a chance to say goodbye to her. So I like seeing that, and just honestly, just seeing again, Pedro nail it. He nailed it very well with his nonverbal acting there.
Definitely.
Yep. And the one thing I will say about this episode, this is where I think her reveal at the end that she wasn't alone in the mall could have been better. It didn't have as much impact when she tells him, because it's like, okay, well, we have an audience already know this.
Yeah, that's true.
Like it's not the same impact that we would have had if it's like, oh, okay. Yeah. And they could have used that as something for a starter part of episode or the second season. Mm-hmm. Just my thoughts, but I understand them trying to contain the game and the DLC into one.
Or even like an epilogue, like after this.
Yeah, that's true.
And I actually agree with your point, because every time I played Left Behind, I've always played it right after beating the game. I don't play it in between. Like, I immediately finish the game and I go right into Left Behind. So I like your point more, because that would have made a little bit more sense. Or could have been an epilogue, could have been like a one-off episode they had after season one's over. Like, hey, you guys want more Last of Us? Watch this. And it could have been just like a sample of what's going to come in the next season.
Yeah. No, exactly. And the other thing I think that's great about just the show in general is they never do the thing you see in video game movies of, hey, look, we did the thing. And also it just doesn't feel like it's a video game. It feels like it's a full thought out show.
But without taking just the like cutscenes of the game. Mm-hmm. Kind of like even like the best versions of Final Fantasy that has been like transformed, it still feels like just a bunch of cutscenes put together. Like it never feels like a full story.
Yeah.
Whereas this one does feel complete. You do get enough of the action to feel like, okay, this is feeling like enough of the video game that, like, as someone who enjoyed the video game franchise, like, I feel fulfilled. I don't feel like I'm just watching all the cutscenes.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, at the end of the day, like, this is, when I first heard the show was getting announced, I was so like, this is going to tank. Like, this is not going to be like, how can you adapt a game like The Last of Us into a TV show? And then I started hearing more and more about it. I'm like, okay, maybe they're going to do some things. And right around when there's like, no, we're just going to cover the game. Like, okay, you have all these actors involved, Neil Druckmann. I'm like, maybe this will be a good show. And at the end of it, I mean, I was very happy. Besides, I don't know, like really 2 episodes that I really didn't love as much as the other ones, but I mean, overall, it kept its tone, it kept its momentum. Like, there wasn't any episodes where I'm like, this is just purely filler, or there wasn't any episodes where it was just purely just because they had to put something into the pad of the runtime. Like, no, it all had a purpose. It all was very, for the most part, for a video game going into a show, it was very consistently good. Like, it wasn't ever bad at any points. It was always good, great, amazing, but it was never okay. Yeah. Like, it was never mid.
So, Cal, on our good, bad, weird scale, what do you give The Last of Us?
I'd definitely give it a good rating.
I also would say good.
The same. Even though I have the parts I bitch about, as a whole, it's still a very good show.
I completely
flashbacks. I'm sorry. I just had to
45 minutes for a stopping spot.
Yeah.
I'm going to find you a flashback. I'm going to find a show that's entirely flashbacks, and there'll be flashbacks of the flashbacks just to send to you. I will save my channel points just to redeem that for you now. And if I have to do the same with a movie, I will find a flashback movie.
Hell yeah.
Yes, I agree.
All right. Well, I do want to thank you for being on the show, Cal. Plug your shit, man.
Yeah, I am Kalloth0467 on Instagram, Twitter, and Twitch. You can check me out. I try to stream about at least 2 to 3 days a week. If I don't stream that week, I definitely do one every Friday, except for this one, because I'm just busy tonight. But come check me out. We love to talk about movies, love to talk about video games, like to just chill and have some fun and play some games. And you get to watch me suffer some days. That's really why people come into my streams, is I suffer by... Nacho knows exactly what I'm talking about, or Nicho knows what I'm talking about with the lovely, lovely Redeems. I'm sure you have your favorite with the glasses one, or it's probably one of the more popular ones I've seen.
The glasses and Spider-Man mask once. That was fun.
It's so hard to wear a mask with glasses. Like, I have to wear contacts, then I just feel weird, because I never wear contacts ever. But thank you guys for having me on. I had a lot of fun talking to you guys, and I mentioned to Nicho earlier, this is really one of the first few times I've actually gotten to use my college degree for something. Like, I had a lot of fun watching the show again and taking notes on it and realizing, like, I had a lot of fun. I really look forward to seeing the episode and look forward to chatting with you guys again.
Hell yeah. No, we look to have you, or we're excited to have you back on the show. Definitely for season 2 of this when it comes out, but we'll find something else to have you back on for. So
awesome, man. Chris, it was awesome to meet you today. And I think this is the first time we've actually ever chatted, Nicho, considering every time we have, it's been messages. So glad we got to finally chat for the first time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So good to have you on. Definitely have to have you back for something.
Yep.
Awesome.
So, but anyway, this has been The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
Thanks for listening.
Peace. Thank you for stopping by this here town of The Good, the Bad, and the Weird. We appreciate your listenership, and if you want more of our takes in your life, feel free to check us out on social media at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, or TGTBTW for short. As well, if we missed a fact, your favorite part of a movie, or just have a suggestion and want to reach out and say howdy, feel free to email us at tgtbtwpodcast@gmail.com. And feel free to join our Discord at The Good, the Bad, and the Weird Podcast, where we talk about movies, just share random banter here and there. And always, check out our podcasters, streamers, or any other content creator we shout out in our episodes. We really appreciate it. And as always, thank you for listening. Peace.